Hi, my name is Mariah and I am the owner of the Etsy shop Owl of It, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to do the satin stitch. This is an embroidery stitch. I'm going to be showing you on this design, which is one of my embroidery patterns that will be available in my shop. You can see I've already done the hat on this little gnome. My pattern is traced on here. This whole little gnome is going to be stitched in the satin stitch. So this is already an example of what it might look like, and then I'll be showing you how to do the satin stitch on the nose. So if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that I like to cut my pieces of embroidery floss about 18 inches long, long enough that I'm not having to redo it frequently, but short enough that it's not knotting while I'm trying to embroider. So each embroidery floss strand has 6 strands that make it up. If you pull it apart, you can kind of see the strands. So for this pattern, I'm going to be using 3 strands. So I'm going to split this piece of embroidery floss in half. Depending on the pattern and the designer of the pattern, people use different amounts of strands for the satin stitch. I've embroidered a pattern that the designer said that they like to use all 6 strands. I did another that the designer told the people doing the design to use 1 strand. If you're just doing the satin stitch on your own, it's up to your preference. I like to use 3 strands because it's kind of a middle ground. 1 strand tends to take a really long time because it's thinner, but I have discovered that if you use like all 6 strands, it's kind of hard to work through the fabric. So for this pattern, I'm using 3 strands. So I'm gonna go ahead and thread my needle. Again, if you've watched my other videos, I recommend using an embroidery needle because it has a bigger eye than a hand sewing needle, which gives you more space to get the embroidery floss in the needle. So I'm gonna go ahead, put it through. I'm going to tie a knot on the end of the string, or on the end of the embroidery floss. And then we're ready to get started. Okay, so the way that a satin stitch is worked, so I have my thread, I've knotted this, so I'm going to start over here on the side. So I'm gonna stick the needle in right here at the bottom of this one edge of the nose. So I'm gonna pull it through. Whoops, guess I need to add another knot. All right, so starting again, putting my needle in at the bottom of the nose on one side, pulling the floss through. So satin stitch is worked from the front to the back. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the top of the side, just like directly above where my needle went in the first time. Then I'm gonna go ahead and pull this through. So what you see is just a line. So that's basically what satin stitch is it's a bunch of lines worked next to each other closely enough that it completely covers the fabric. One of the important things about satin stitch is that you always start at one side. So since I put my needle in at the bottom the first time, I'm going to put my needle in at the bottom right next to it. So this means that on the back, your design kind of looks like it's mirrored with, you know, some of the threads from the ends, but it's important to do this because with trial and error of trying to do this before, you know, save the floss length, especially when you're working on a bigger design, it uses up a lot of floss because you're basically doing the same thing on the back and the front. So I've tried to do, you know, like I'll go in at the top, so then I'll start at the top and go to the bottom. But what's really important about working the satin stitch in this way is that it helps keep your thread tension really smooth. So if you're, you know, like you came in at the top and then you started at the top again, sometimes I've noticed that, you know, my thread on the front won't be super tight, so it'll look kind of wrinkly. So that's why it's important to work a satin stitch the way that it's designed. And I've had to, you know, when I've tried to like conserve thread and do it the other way, I've had to like cut the thread off and then do it again because I didn't like the way that it looked. So all of that to say, you're gonna, you know, go down, put your needle in where it was, and then put it back in directly above. And then you'll start to see that it's working up like this. Again, going in at the bottom, going to the back at the top. So you'll continue to work this across. Since this is a nose, it's a little bit curved, so I'm just following the design. Same thing with this hat, you know, it's a different height, so I started at the bottom, you know, and each of these stitches were different lengths as it went up and across. So I hope this is a helpful tutorial. And if you have any questions, you can let me know.